webinar. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar for community project funding grantees regarding forms and submission. I'm Randall Mullen with TDA Consulting, and I'll introduce my co-presenter momentarily. First, I do want to apologize for the slight delay in starting. I don't know if others had a similar issue, but we had difficulty entering Zoom due to a recent update. Before we begin presenting the content, I first want to cover a few logistics. If you've participated in prior CPF webinars, you probably know this detail. All participants will be muted during the webinar, so you will participate in so-called listen mode. The PowerPoint presentation either has been sent to you or will be available to participants on the HUD Exchange soon after this webinar. And you will find the slides for the recently launched CPF cohort landing page that is shown in this slide. And just to note, you are part of the FY23 cohort, and you will want to click on the button in the lower right-hand side of the screenshot that appears here. And I will provide you a few more details about how to access those slides in just a moment. Although you will participate in listen mode, we want you to be actively engaged. You may submit content-related questions using the chat feature, sending those questions to everyone. The co-presenter and I will monitor the chat and answer clarifying questions when possible as they're being asked during the presentation. We'll also pause at the end of each section of today's webinar, read aloud those frequently asked questions, and orally answer them for all to hear. As in the prior webinars, we have reserved time for questions and answers toward the end of the presentation, a devoted period for that use. And we'll invite HUD representatives to answer the more difficult questions and clarify what we presenters might have provided in earlier responses as necessary. Here's the agenda that we'll follow today. As I mentioned, it will begin with introductions, followed by a brief review of the prior cohort webinars, and then we'll begin our presentation on forms and submission, the topic of today's webinar. After we cover those agenda items, we'll have the final question and answer period and identify resources available at the HUD Exchange to further guide you in your preparation of forms and submission of the application package to HUD. And lastly, we'll ask you to complete an evaluation either before you end the participation in the webinar or afterwards. Now I'll begin the introductions and tag my co-presenter who will introduce herself and in turn, the HUD representatives we have with us today. Again, my name's Randall Mullen and I'm with TDA Consulting, where I've worked for many years as both vice president and senior consultant on a wide range of community development projects. I've recently assisted HUD in explaining guidance around special congressional appropriations. That work has included both recovery from natural disasters and response to the COVID-19 pandemic, plus recovery from its associated economic impacts, and now the CPF program. The co-presenter today is Jennifer Alpha. Jennifer, will you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Jennifer Alpha. I'm a senior consultant with TDA Consulting. Been with TDA about 12 years, and I work on programs similar to Randall. I also started my career as an attorney, so I do love a good form. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk through how you can most effectively complete the forms that you need for your submission.
Okay, and I believe we have HUD representatives with us. Jennifer, do you want to pass the introductions to them? Perhaps.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Hi, Connor's here with us today.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Connor LaRoe. I am a program analyst with the Congressional Grants Division. So primarily working on facilitating technical assistance projects like the cohort sessions that you're on now. And then I'm also working as a systems officer helping many of your grant officers with their grantee portfolios in the way of DRGR access and troubleshooting. And I do believe that we have some other HUD folks on the call. I do see Tracy is on the call, and I thought I saw someone else, but if you were the representative would like to introduce yourselves, feel free to do so.
Hi, I'm Tracy Rowe. I am a grant officer covering the states of Connecticut, New Hampshire, as well as Rhode Island. And I love a good form too, Jennifer.
Are there any other HUD representatives, Connor?
Hi, my name is Giddy, and I am the grant officer for Illinois.
Okay, great. So we have 3 representatives today, and that will only help you make sure that your questions are answered. The CPF cohort is assembled for you to receive guidance that will assist in the satisfactory completion of the necessary grant materials. You were invited to join this cohort because of an award of an FY23 grant, as I mentioned earlier. And to facilitate the cohort, we've enrolled you in a learning management system called Absorb, which is hosted by TDA Consulting. Previous sessions held on the dates detailed here covered requirements for submission of the grant materials, beginning with project narrative. And another co-presenter and myself delivered that webinar on January 25th, and it covered what must be described in the full project description that you would include in your grant package. The second item concerned budget and went over how to itemize not only the planned uses of your grant, but also identify sources of funding for the entire project. And then finally, environmental review, when and how to assess the impacts of a project on the surrounding environment and vice versa. And then, of course, today, the topic that we will be covering, forms and submission. We will assist you with how to complete not just one, but many forms. So we hope you will embrace the kind of enthusiasm that Jennifer and I have for this topic. And you will relate this to the content that's necessary for you to essentially enter into the grant agreement and then start your community's project. To obtain the available resources, including these webinar slides and prior webinar slides, we do urge you again to check out the CPF landing page. And if you haven't signed up for the HUD Exchange listserv to obtain those updates, you should do so. This will enable you to add notifications for the CPF program, and then you'll be notified about updates as well as the availability of the slides that are presented now. And I'm going to drop into the chat actually a PDF file that is a screenshot of the place that you will go to ensure that you have properly registered. And Jennifer may actually also give you the live hyperlink. The reason that I have deliberately included this screenshot is because of the fact that you will select the CPF grants program under a separate identity. It is listed as EDI-CPF grants. And so you'll see where to check the right box to receive notifications for the CPF program. And Jennifer, if you can just place into the chat the hyperlink, that will help folks if they want to use it right away. If you download that PDF file, you'll also notice that the file name includes the link that Jennifer can place in the chat. And we hope that this will help you ensure that you stay up to date. Now, what specifically will this topic of forms cover, and how will Jennifer and I address it? Once again, we'll explain guidance based on the FY23 CPF grant guide, as shown here, version 1. And we'll follow essentially the same approach that we did on narrative, budget, and environmental review. The required forms for submission of your grant packet are described in the attachments of the grant guide. And Jennifer and I will detail key forms and instructions, beginning with the most important of those forms, the standard form or SF 424 application for federal assistance. And then we'll move on to other required forms and wrap up with the grantee submission checklist. But first, it's time for a poll. So Jennifer, will you please launch the poll?
Yes, I will. Okay, here it comes. So the question for our poll is, have you begun to complete the forms for your CPF submission? This will help us understand if you have sort of a basic understanding of what the forms are, or if you're brand new to this topic. And looks like we've got about everyone answering the question. We'll give you a few more seconds. All right, we'll end the poll now. Okay, looks like most folks have not started. So we've got about 60% who have not started yet. So this is your introduction to forms. For those of you who have started, the 36% who have started, this will be a good opportunity for you to ask us any questions that you may have encountered along the way so far in your review of the forms that you need to submit. So thank you for taking the time to answer that question. We know now that a lot of folks, this is going to be just sort of a beginner introduction.
All right. Thank you for your responses to the poll, and we will try to tailor our descriptions to you in a manner that reflects the fact that more of you are just now beginning than not. Okay, we will start, as I indicated earlier, with key forms and instructions, particularly the SF 424. As I mentioned, it is the key form for you to complete. And those of you who represent grantees who receive other HUD funding are probably familiar with this standard application for financial assistance from the federal government. Other grantees are encountering it for the first time. And as Jennifer noted in the poll results, this may be a first experience for most of you who are just now starting to complete your grant packet. The SF 424 for federal assistance is the common application form for organizations to receive federal funding from either HUD or other executive departments. It provides basic information about your organization as a grantee, which requests those funds be made available by a special appropriation of Congress. As such, your organization is viewed as an applicant, and you must carefully identify and describe your organization along with the planned community project and its funding source. How can you obtain the SF 424 application for federal assistance? Well, first, you would refer to the FY23 CPF grant guide and turn to page 11 as shown here. As I'll demonstrate in just a moment, you may use the link in the first paragraph to take your computer to the related web page. Follow these steps to then find the SF 424 at grants.gov, the landing page there. Although the HUD Exchange screenshot may not immediately share that homepage, you can then simply go to grants.gov, where you will then, number one, select forms, as I will show you in a demonstration, and then go to SF 424 family. And don't let that throw you. It's the type of federal grant that benefits more than individuals. And then 3, select the application for federal assistance. I'm going to now change my screen to grants.gov and share with you exactly what I just went over. You see here grants.gov, and if you pull down on this menu for forms, you will see SF424 family, which I have already selected over here in the left side. And then if you scroll down here, you will find on this, actually the first page, the application for federal assistance, the SF424. And it's important to note that this is in the form of a PDF file, the form itself, as well as instructions, which you can click here, much like the way you may obtain forms and instructions when filing your income tax next month. Jennifer, I'll just pause for a moment there to see if, as I switch back to the presentation, to see if there are any questions in the chat that you might want to immediately address.
No questions so far.
Okay, all right. We'll go back to the presentation now then. And continue where we left off. Just to recap, you download that form as indicated here, but I do want to stress that even though you would pick the instructions that are accompanying that standard form, you also want to, again, look at the CPF grant guide at page 12 to follow the specific instructions that relate or modify those general instructions that are used across the federal government to what is necessary for the CPF program. And also, we want to note that if your computer's browser settings don't permit downloads, you may need to obtain help in allowing for the download. We know some of you work for large scale organizations, maybe a local government, a city or a county, and consequently, you may need the help from your IT specialist. You would need to add those permissions. And as we've oftentimes noted, you probably have heard this several times before, you want to make sure you have the current version of Acrobat to Adobe Acrobat in order to use those forms as they are fillable forms. And that's the point of this next slide. You can complete the entire form in Acrobat. Follow those instructions that begin on page 12 and continue on page 13, and then note additional references as appropriate. Now here, I'm actually going to pause and share with you a copy of the SF424 that I have already downloaded and point out the key elements of this form that is central to your preparation of the grant materials. And what I am going to share here is that PDF file. Bear with me while I make sure I get the right one in front of us. Okay, you see here that the key elements include the applicant information in box 8 that is shown right here. And it's vitally important for you to use the legal name of your organization. And together with that, make it relate to the unique identifier entity identifier, the UEE, which you would obtain from SAMS.gov. If you've not already registered with SAMS.gov, you'll need to do so. And then you and also may want to alternatively use other information, but it all must correspond as you're identifying the address and the organization unit, the official identity of your organization as it appears with the UEI, and the address and organizational unit that correspond with the parties involved in your project. The second item that is important to cover is on box 15 for the project description. Here is the only place where you really add in a narrative. And obviously this is just a field where you would start that description, and you'll probably need to add attachments because your description should completely describe the entirety of your project. And then the last item is what I referenced earlier, item number 21. The application for federal assistance does require a signature and actually a statement of certification that applies to all the grantees and is specified here, essentially assuring that you are providing accurate and truthful information. And going back now to the PowerPoint presentation, I want to pick up with that point that I'd mentioned or referred to. There are also additional certifications related to that box 21, and I will cover those actually a little bit later. But first, I want to again stress the relationship between the fillable form, the specific instructions, and that particular note. To correctly follow those specific instructions, you must possess those three essential pieces of information that I referenced in that brief demonstration: the legal name of your organization, the entity, unique entity identifier from SAMS.gov, and then the award information from the joint explanatory statement, or JES, that appears in the congressional record. This would have been provided to you in your award packet by the Department of HUD. And as you fill in each box with your project's information, you'll be directed to follow both the general instructions for those boxes and, in some instances, leave others blank. In the center of this slide, you see those specific instructions which tell you, what boxes to check, what to leave blank, and where you would enter, as indicated here, item 8, the legal name of your organization, including its unique entity identifier, as well as the other information that I referenced, which is so very important. And then you would want to recognize, before you consider that form complete, you must ensure that the certifications are complete. And that last box includes instructions for how you would possibly add supplemental certifications. It requires your authorized representative to sign and date the form, thereby making those assurances on behalf of your organization, attesting, as I said, that the foregoing information is true, complete, and accurate. After you've completed that SF424 application, I referenced that there would be supplemental assurances offered depending upon the nature of your project. They would be one or two or both. You're urged to download these additional forms, and as you see here, one relates to non-construction programs, the other to construction programs. There are slightly different additional certifications necessary or assurances necessary for your grant beyond what's appearing in box 21 of the standard form 424. And it's SF 424B for non-construction programs, which would include a lot of your grant awards related to public services, as well as SF 424D, which is the set of assurances for construction programs. We would urge you to check with your grant officer, if necessary, to determine which of these apply, or when in doubt, both of these additional assurances might apply. I do want to pause and note here that something Jennifer and I became aware of with the help of the HUD representatives. They are in the process of creating an enhanced tool that will be used for their grant officers to review packages and particularly strengthen the way that instructions are conveyed for each of these special areas of completing the grant package. And there will be more on that topic to follow. Okay, at this stage, I think we'll pause, Jennifer, to see what questions have arisen in regard to the key forms before I pass it off to you to go over the other required forms.
Okay, great, thanks. We do have some questions in the chat, but Tracy's been great about answering those. Thank you, Tracy.
Yay, Tracy.
But I did want to just touch on a few for the benefit of the group. There was a question about how the document needs to be signed. And so that document does need to be signed by your authorized representative. And so you'll need to get an actual signature on that document before it's submitted. And then there was a question about how you submit the forms. So the question was, it's not clear on where we are to upload the SF 424. We were informed to send to our program officer prior to ER. And then Tracy did answer that and said that you need to provide the completed SF 424s and the other standard forms to your grant officer. So I just wanted to clarify that because that might be a question that others have. And then someone asked, are the attachments we upload with question 15 the narrative and budget documents that we already created, or are they a summary of those? That was a question that we have not gotten to yet.
Can you repeat that question, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think they're thinking they need to attach additional documents here. So it says, are the attachments we upload with question 15 of the form the narrative and budget documents that we already created, or are they a summary of those?
Okay, Tracy might want to add clarification here, but what I believe the question relates to is the
It's just the JES
424
description.
item 15, which
Yeah.
is the description, and you are invited to add attachments. So the question, I think, Tracy, concerns that particular item.
I think Giddy went off mute as well, but question 15 is just the JES description, the description that's stated in the joint explanatory statement. And 14 is the affected areas by the project where you can add an attachment such as an address, a map. You could provide those directly to your grant officer as well. The description of I'm not sure what the question entails.
Well, I believe the question, I'm actually looking at the, in fact, I will try to stop sharing the slides and share this.
Hi, Tracy. I'm just going to jump in here for a moment. This is Giddy. So for question 15, specifically what you're going to add is at bare minimum, the description that would have been on your original application to your congressional person. So that would be exactly what Tracy said on the joint explanatory statement. Sometimes it says something like build warehouse, or so at the very minimum, it's just going to be a project description, a sentence or so. There are times that you can add additional verbiage, but we just expect the additional information to come within your attached narrative. But in this specific section, we would just need to know the title of your project.
And that cryptic phrase, which, as you noted, does appear on the joint explanatory statement, the JES, in the congressional record. And we're actually going to be doing an activity later in this webinar that focuses on the importance of what you describe in box 15 in identifying the title of your project and that short phrase, like the example provided by Giddy and Tracy, making sure that then the attachment describes a project narrative that elaborates on and remains in full alignment with what is expressed in that JES. I'll be sharing with you an example of what appears in the congressional record, and it is so brief, I think you'll better understand why it's vitally important that you add an attachment that is the project narrative, but at the same time, making certain that the phrase that appears in the JES expressing the intent of Congress is in fact the way that you are proposing to use your CPF grant funding. Either Tracy or Giddy, did you want to add anything more on an answer to that question? Because that's probably the most important thing that we'll cover during this webinar.
I think Giddy had a very excellent answer.
Okay.
And really quick,
All
this
right,
is
Jen.
this is Connor. I did see a question from Teresa asking about we need to fill out the direct deposit form. Who does our letter need to be addressed to from our financial institution? Giddy or Tracy, feel free to weigh in on this. But as far as I know, as long as the letter is addressed to like HUD or the Congressional Grants Division, that should be fine. And then it should just specify you know, who the account holder is, the organization name, and then the routing number and then account number for the banking information.
And as you know, Connor, that's the topic Jennifer is going to cover along with the lobbying form. So
Yep,
if
right.
y'all would like, we'll resume unless there are other questions, Jennifer, that we need to address.
Yeah, so the one that I did want to just highlight, Tracy answered in the chat, but just to highlight it for others, because this is a question that has come up, I think, on nearly every session I've done, and that's what happens if you need to change your authorized representative. And so if that is the case, because we've already mentioned that that phrase before, your authorized representative, the person who has to sign your document, if you need to change that person, you need to provide a letter requesting the change to your grant officer with the updated contact information. All right. And so I think for now, that is all the questions related to the SF424s or the, you know, general things like the authorized representative. So we'll move on now to the other forms. So we're going to talk now about two additional forms that are required. The first that we're going to talk about is the disclosure of lobbying activities form. This is the SFLLL form. This form, I want to note that you need to complete this form even if you do not do any lobbying activities. Some folks think that, oh, if they're not lobbying, then this doesn't apply to them because there's nothing to disclose. But that's not the case. Everyone's going to submit this form. If you do not engage in any lobbying activities and you have nothing to disclose, then you are going to mark NA in part 10 of the form and still submit the form. Okay, so this applies to everyone. However, if you do engage in lobbying activities, you're going to fully complete this form. And this applies if you are spending any funds other than federally appropriated funds for lobbying to influence an officer, employee of any agency, a member of Congress, an officer, an employee of Congress, or an employee of a member of Congress in connection with the federal grant. So, as I said, if you have engaged in lobbying activities, you do complete this form in its entirety. Even if you haven't, you're still going to submit the form. You're just going to mark NA in Part 10. You can go to the next slide. So for more information about the requirements around this form, you can access the grant guide on page 13. You can read more about this lobbying disclosure form. You can use the links on the grant guide page right there. You can see them at the bottom of the page. That will link you directly to the SFLLL Disclosure of Lobbying Activities form. It takes you to the gsa.gov page where you'll download the form, and then you'll save it and open it in Adobe Reader. So just like the SF424s, you can complete this form on a computer using Adobe Acrobat. Again, for more information and the links to the form, you'll find those on page 13 of the grant guide. You want to make sure you get this signed before you submit it. The next form and the last true form that we're going to talk about is the SF1199A. This is your direct deposit sign-up form. So a very important one for everyone to enable you to access your funds. So to establish a direct deposit of grant funds, you're going to complete this SF1199A form. The grantee completes sections 1 and 2 of the form, and then your bank or financial institution is going to complete section 3 of the form. So this is a 2-part process. You're going to complete part of it. Your bank's going to complete the other part. The completed form then gets emailed to your grant officer. Note that the bottom of this form is going to tell you to mail the form into HUD, but that's not what you want to do. You just want to email this completed form to your grant officer along with your other application materials. So again, just to give you the resource for understanding more about this direct deposit form, in the grant guide on page 19, you're going to see links for the page where you can download this form. And then there is also in the grant guide sort of form instructions. You can see those at the bottom of the screenshot there, where section 1 is completed by the grantee, section 2 completed by the grantee. It shows you the type of information that's going to go into each of the cells on that form, and kind of walk you through what's required in each of those fields so that you know that you're completing it appropriately. Like the other forms, this form can be completed on a computer with Adobe Acrobat. You want to reference page 19 for additional information for the link. Grantees completing sections 1 and 2 of the form. Your financial institution is completing section 3. In addition to the form itself, you need to include a voided check or a deposit slip with the form. And then all of that gets emailed with your other materials to your grant officer. So don't forget the voided check or a deposit slip so that you can fully satisfy all the requirements to set up your direct deposit. You want to verify this form is all correct, right? This is a really important step. You want to do that with all your forms, obviously, but you want to particularly double check this form to make sure that all of your information on there is accurate prior to submitting it, because this is how you will receive your funds.
Jennifer, we might want to pause here and answer questions that have been posted in the chat related to both the direct deposit form and the lobbying form before we move on to the grantee submission checklist. Sandra raises a question. The direct deposit form is what I completed last year. Do I need to do another one with a more current date, or can I still use that one?
Yes, and I see that Giddy answered that question. Thank you. That yes, you will need to complete a new one for the current grant. So
And that's
thank you.
important to note, because some of you may be receiving other grant funding. It's also possible that that information might change. So it does need to be current, and will become particularly important later on when you are beginning to disperse your grant. There was also a question or two related to the lobbying form, and I thought maybe we would answer these aloud as well. Elizabeth asks or comments, our city's lobbyist for other issues not related to the specific project using the CPF funds. Can we put NA in section 10 of the SFLLL? And I think what they're asking, there's another question: is the lobbying disclosure only for this grant or for any grant funds? I think that those two questions are related, in the sense that there may be a lobbyist hired, but if that lobbyist does not represent the city in regard to the request for the congressional funding of the CPF grant in fiscal year 23, do they need to fill out the form?
Yes, that's a question I will defer to our HUD folks. What would we all say in response to that question?
A different way of asking it is the lobbying disclosure only for this grant or for any grant funds?
Right. It's this is Giddy again. It's for any grant. This is a disclosure just in general. It's not specific to the CPF funds.
Okay. Thank you, Giddy.
Very helpful. There was also another question up a little higher that said, we need to fill out the direct deposit form. Who does our letter need to be addressed to from our financial institution? And then a little farther down, Tracy did put the address in the chat. So it's a nice big bold print there.
Right.
Thank you for that, Tracy. So it's right there, HUD/Office of CPD, 451 7th Street, Southwest Washington, D.C., 20410. So you can scroll back through the chat for that address if you need it.
And also it is on page 19 of the grant guide, as I'm showing here, the lower right corner.
Yeah, down there in the section where it walks you through the different fields.
Yep.
Yes, you can get it there as well if you don't want to scroll back. And then Tracy mentioned that you can include a letter verifying the account from your bank. And I believe, Tracy, that's in lieu of doing like a voided check or a deposit slip, correct?
Yeah, so I've encountered some grantees that might not have a check available. So they are also welcome to contact their bank to provide a letter.
Good point.
And then you'd use that address that's at the bottom there as the addressee. Okay, great.
If there are no other questions, I guess
Yeah.
we can continue with grantee submission checklist.
I think we got them all. There was a direct follow-up question on, just to note, Tracy, maybe you can take a look at it too. You had answered the question about the drop downs for the 501c3 in the SF424, but I think someone had a follow-up question to that, and I think they only sent it to me. Let me send it to you, and then if you want to, actually, I'm going to put it in the group chat, and then
Yeah.
you can answer that way if you don't mind. Thank you.
That way we'll have a record of it. We're trying to answer all these questions, and we'll use the group chat where you posted a question to everyone to make sure we've covered them. And if not, you will receive an email with an answer.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so that actually covers all of our forms. Those 3 sets of forms that we just talked about, those are the forms that you're going to submit with your materials. However, we wanted to go over the grantee submission checklist that is included in the grant guide. Now, this checklist is not a required form, it is optional. However, using it is going to ensure that you have covered all the bases in pulling together your materials and that you're submitting a quality submission. And so this checklist will allow you to walk through each part of the package, making sure that you've met all of the requirements. And so we have a screenshot of the form here. This is a paper form, as I'll point out on the next slide, but you can use it with a pencil or a pen or a highlighter on your Adobe to make sure that you have covered everything that you need to cover for your submission. So first item on the checklist, has the grantee, do you have an active registration with sam.gov? So that is the first question on the checklist. Do you have an active registration with sam.gov? And that's an important one. I'm not sure we've talked about that in other sessions, but this checklist reminds you that you need to have that active registration. If you don't, you'll need to go in and register with sam.gov. The legal name of the funding recipient in the SF424s, Block 8, is the same as the entity named in the JES. So make sure that that is also true. If there have been any changes, you want to get in touch with your representative, your CPD representative. The amount of the requested grant is the same as the amount authorized in the JES. Just double check that that is true. No typos or anything like that. The SF424 is complete, properly executed and dated, and that you've included the additional SF424 B and D as applicable. You want to make sure you have your SFLLL form. That's your lobbying disclosure form. And again, everyone is submitting a copy of that form. Even if you don't do lobbying, you're going to mark NA in box 10. Then you want to look at your project narrative and make sure that it describes the entire project. We had a whole session on narratives. So if you want to go back to that narrative session, refresh your memory about what's required in the project narrative, that would be a great idea. But you just want to double check your project narrative to make sure it is including the entire project and being very specific about the activities that will be financed with your CPF grant. We had a whole session on budget as well, and one of these checklist items is the project budget is consistent with the requirements of the applicable Appropriations Act and cost principles in 2 CFR Part 200. We talked about budget and what should be included in your budget in the budget cohort session, so you can look back at those slides in that recording. In that budget session, we also talked about indirect cost rates. This is something that we could spend a lot more time talking about, but we already talked about it a little bit in budget. And even in budget, we gave you some resources that you can look at to see how it applies to you, how you use it. And then you can come back with questions once you've figured out your own case-specific situation as it relates to indirect costs. But in short, you're going to decide whether you are opting for the de minimis rate, which is the default, or if you do have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, you're going to be using that, and then you're going to provide some additional information to HUD. But those are all the items on the checklist. So you want to make sure you've gone through all of those and at least hit these boxes. If you've hit these boxes, you've already knocked out a lot of things that are common problems with people's submissions, which will cut down on the review time and the back and forth that you have with your grant officer. So again, this is in the grant guide, this checklist. It's on page 41. So if you want to grab a clean copy of that, you can work with that to do your quality check. Okay, and again, it's not a fillable form, but you can use it as a guide. Note that some of these items on the checklist are not forms. We have just 3 forms, right? That's the SF424 packet of forms, the SFLLL, and then the 1099A for your direct deposit. Those are your 3 forms. And then all these materials together are going to be submitted with your narrative, your budget, and all of these forms will go to your grant officer at the address listed there, cpfgrants@hud.gov.
Thank you for going over each item on the checklist, Jennifer. We actually have a few questions that include the comments that you made, and I know you'll want to answer these questions. Tracy has helped answer them, but they bear repeating, I think, and will actually factor into the activity that we will ask participants to do. Must the budget include the entire project or just what the grant will be covering? And Tracy indicated the budget should have a total budget and the EDI-CPF portion. And you handled the budget session along with a co-presenter. Do you want to elaborate any part of that answer?
No, I think that's the answer. I know folks would sometimes like a different answer, but
right.
you do need to include the budget for the entire project. You have to be really clear about the uses of your CPF portion of your grant, but the whole budget for the project needs to be included.
Yes, and the phrase that I recall you using or your co-presenter mentioning is that budget should essentially be a sources and uses budget, which identifies the entirety of your project funding and each of the sources separately, which would enable then HUD to determine how the CPF grant will be used as opposed to any other sources of funding. We also have a question that I don't know that I completely understand in regard to HUD 1044 as part of the submission. We will generate that when HUD will generate that when the grant agreement is executed. And maybe the point here is that we're covering the grantee submission packet. And as such, there will be further instructions that will follow, especially once your grant agreement is executed and you're then invited to set up your project in a system that will enable you to draw funds when you're making disbursements and essentially reimburse yourself for the costs that you are paying in respect to your CPF grant authorized activities. A couple of other messages just came in. One says we will have multiple sources for our total project. We have received a CPF grant. We've received CDBG HUD funds towards our project. Since these are both HUD funds, do I list on the form all the funds in the HUD column or list the 2 HUD sources separately? And I believe what Giddy indicated is consistent with what you just described. You need to list them separately. And as I mentioned, that they would be in, for example, different columns in that sources and uses budget. One column for the CPF grant and its uses, and then an additional column for the CDBG funding and its use, as well as other columns should you receive, say, funding from additional sources or have donations that have contributed to the way that you will fund the entirety of your project.
I just want to clarify, this is Giddy. I just want to clarify this response a little bit more. You will list them separately on your actual budget that you submit to your grant officer. However, on number 18, funding sources of your 424, if it's a federal grant, you would have to list them together as there is no other line for you to list additional federal grants. So you would have to add the two funding sources from CDBG and from the CPF together. But if you're submitting your budget, you would break it down in the budget section of your actual submission, grant material submission.
And then, of course, Kitty and Tracy, there would be a separate SF-424 form for the CDBG grant handled by the entitlement community that is receiving that funding.
Correct.
Okay. Do you see any other questions in the chat, Jennifer?
Let's see, did it? I think we did answer that one about the different sources. Oh, so someone was asking, do other sources in the budget, if you have other sources and they're listed in the budget, do they become a legally binding match? So for example, if they have 1 million in planning from CPF funds and a proposed 5 million for construction from another source, does that $5 million to be spent in the future get tracked as a match, or is it just informational?
And I believe the answer to that question is that this is not a match program. So you are certainly expected to identify the prospective use of those funds in your grantee submission packet. But and there might be reporting in the system that, Jennifer, you're familiar with. However, there is not the same kind of expectation that there might be for those HUD grants that do require a match, such as the home program or the SNAPS programs. Either Connor, Tracy, or Giddy, did you want to elaborate on that point about match?
Yeah, I was also under the impression that for the EDI CPF grant, there is no matching requirement.
Yeah, okay. Okay, if there are no other questions, Jennifer, it's time for another poll. And I'd like to set up this poll with an example that illustrates what the typical grantee would ideally do with the grantee submission checklist. This is the activity that I referenced earlier. First, the grantee's representative would assemble all the grant materials that Jennifer and I have gone over, which she referenced item by item in the checklist, determine that they're complete, and then thoughtfully check all the boxes before submitting the grant application packet. Often a grantee, though, might be unsure about certain items. And we're going to take an example now that I will share with you, which illustrates that point.
Randall, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Connor, did you hear the introduction?
No, I don't think we did.
Okay, my apologies. I'm trying to share the next item. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have an activity for the way that will help us to clarify further different points covered in this forms and submission webinar. And I'd like to set up an example that illustrates what a typical grantee would ideally do with the grantee submission checklist that Jennifer went over. And as such, we would like for you to imagine yourself in the role of a grantee's representative, first, you would assemble all the necessary materials referenced in the checklist, and then you would determine that they are complete and thoughtfully check all the boxes before submitting the grant application. Often, though, a grantee might be unsure about certain items, and we're going to take this one example to make this point clear to everyone. And I'm going to share this example, which is referred to as ABC Supportive Services Project. And you can see in the description here that it is a fiscal year 23 CPF grant award. The project narrative describes it as the ABC Supportive Housing Project will provide housing services to residents with special needs. The residents will receive drug and alcohol rehabilitation services. The agency is also renovating an apartment building as part of the project, and it's expanding its operations with support of the United Way. The description then ends by saying that the project is made possible in part by a $1 million CPF grant to ABC Housing Services. The second part of their consideration of this grant package being complete is relating this to the grant joint explanatory statement as it appears in the congressional record. And this is an excerpt from the congressional record, at least the tabular form of it, which shows the project being identified as ABC Supportive Housing Service. So that aligns. The grantee is ABC Housing Services, Inc., and the amount is the $1 million. But what's important to note here is that that phrase that your HUD representatives have emphasized is it's actually just one word. It refers to services related to ABC Supportive Housing's project. The next item that the grantees representatives would cover then would be their unanswered questions on the grantee submission checklist. And if we look here, we see that the three issues that they have identified and are uncertain about whether the package is complete first relates to the legal name of the funding recipient and the SF 424 Block 8 being the same as that identified in the JES. And if we look up here, it does appear that maybe could be checked off, but we would like to obtain your thought. If you were in the position, what would you do there? The second item is related to those supplemental assurances forms, and they have checked off, of course, that they have completed the SF 424, but they're uncertain about which of those forms to include. They had included the SF 424 together with the SF 424D because they know they are undertaking this new project that involves both construction and housing services. They are inclined to check off number 2 as well, but they recognize that their description here is a little ambiguous. It's referring to the $1 million grant to ABC Housing Services, but it doesn't say exactly how that grant will be used, either for services or for renovating the apartment building. The last issue really kind of drives home the uncertainty around their grant submission packet. They're wondering if their project narrative describes the entire project and indicates the specific activities that will be financed with the CPF grant funds. So based upon this information, we have for you a set of 3 poll questions that will help you to kind of understand the importance of completing the information specified in the grantee submission checklist. The first question, and we would like for you now to just prepare to respond to the poll, relates to that first unchecked box. Is our agency correctly named on all the legal documents, grant materials, as well as the congressional record? Does that align? The second is that form, the SF424B for non-construction, required for our housing services project? And then the third is, do we describe the whole project in detail? Jennifer, why don't we launch the poll and see what the participants' answers are?
And folks are
Okay.
answering. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
We've got a ways to go. Got only about a third of the folks, I think, have submitted so far. So we're getting close, though. Numbers are ticking upward.
And if you're not yet certain, I will drop into the chat the file that I shared and inadvertently muted myself when I was trying to make certain that I could do just that. You can open up the description that I just shared in case you're uncertain about each of these questions. And I do want to point out that there are 3 questions, so be sure that you answer all 3.
I think everybody who's going to answer has probably answered, so I'm going to end this poll and share the
Okay.
results.
All right.
It looks like for question 1, 79% of folks say the answer is yes. So is our agency correctly named on all legal documents? And it says yes. 80%, about 80% of folks said yes. Do you want to talk about each one individually, Randall, or should we go through all of them?
Well, we can just recap the answers, and then I'll advance to the next slide, which shows the correct answer.
Okay. Question 2, is that form, the SF424B, required for our housing service project? And 75% of folks said yes, it is required. And then, do we describe the whole project in detail and the uses of the grant? And 64% said yes.
And I will note that 36% did answer no to that question, which is higher than the percentages that said no on the previous 2. So I think it might be that there was maybe more uncertainty around that third question's answer than the other 2s. Well, let's go back to the slide presentation now, and I'm going to share with you the answer key, which reveals what the correct answers are. Again, that first question was, is our agency correctly named on all the legal documents? And in that case, the agency's name is exactly as it appears in the JES, referring to ABC Housing, Inc. And that corresponds with the project description that has been provided to be submitted in respect to the grantee submission packet. Item 2 is the form required for our housing and service project. And this is a little harder to answer because of the ambiguity around that the use of funds and the potential that the intent of Congress is for the grant to be used for services, but the grantee is using other funds for renovating the apartment building where the supportive services will be provided. It's very likely that both forms might be necessary. But what's clear is in regard to question number 3. Do they describe the whole project and uses of the grant? Is that narrative specific enough to include the specific activities that will be financed with the CPF funds? Will the activities are they specifically identified in respect to the CPF funding as well as the other sources? And this goes to the point that we had made earlier about the importance of that narrative aligning with a sources and uses budget that would show how the grant is perhaps being used as intended for the housing services, and the other funds are being used for both the renovation of the apartment building and the expansion of related support services and administrative costs that are being paid for from the contribution from the United Way. So the 2 answers were correct. For questions 1 and 2, that's yes. The question number 3 is answered no. That description does not cover the whole project in its entirety in a clear fashion that aligns with the specific uses of the CPF grant. I'll pause there and see what questions there might be in regard to the activity before we move on. Are there any questions that you see, Jennifer?
I think no questions so far on the exercise.
Okay. And are there any comments that either Connor, Tracy, or Giddy would like to add?
No, I think I'm all set, Randall.
All right. Well, as we don't have any other questions and answers, we can proceed with the closing slides. Jennifer, take it away.
Great. Oh, wonderful. Thank you all. So actually, let me get rid of this poll here and let you know what happens next. So we are almost at the end of our cohort series. Thank you all for sticking with us throughout this many sessions. We've completed all 4 formal webinars, and the last piece we have is the office hour sessions on forms. So that is the next and last stop for this cohort series. So we'll talk more about that in just a second. You can obtain all of the materials for the previous webinars on the HUD Exchange. The slides are there. The recordings get posted as they are processed and transcripted, and then they will show up on the HUD Exchange usually in about a week or so. So stay tuned for those if you need to refer back to the recordings. I believe that the narrative and budget sessions have already been posted. So those materials will all be archived on the HUD Exchange. So as I mentioned, our last and final stop for the cohort series is the Forms office hours, and that will take place on March 12th. So next Tuesday from 2 to 3:30. So you can bring your questions on forms, or if you have any lingering questions on anything else, bring them with you. We want to make sure folks are getting as much of their questions answered as possible before we wrap up the cohort series. So certainly bring anything you've got for us to that session next week. If you do want to reach out to either Randall or myself directly, you are certainly welcome to do that. There are our email addresses there on the screen. You are also welcome to message the cohorts at tdainc.org mailbox. You've been receiving communication from the cohorts mailbox throughout the last few weeks, so that would be an easy email for you to access. You're welcome to respond to that with any other questions or clarifications that you need. And then just a reminder of the resources. We've shared this slide, I think, in all of the sessions, but it doesn't hurt to give you a reminder that there are many resources out there for you as you work through your submission and your implementation of the program. Your grant officer assignments can be accessed on the HUD Exchange at the link that's provided there. Of course, you want to familiarize yourself with the CPF program website. That is where all of the CPF program resources are held. It's going to include lots of great things like the grant guide, which is also linked there on the slide, additional desk guides that are forthcoming, videos on DRGR, so that when you get to that stage of your implementation, you can follow along step by step in a video. Lots of really great resources, so make sure that you know where that page is and you've taken a look at all the different materials on it. We also have all of the environmental officer contacts in a link there on the screen. And then just a final plug for the help desk, which is the AAQ, the Ask a Question. You can submit a question to the AAQ anytime, night or day. So as it comes to you, you can pop a question into the AAQ, and that's going to be there as a resource for you. So if you just need a quick answer to something, you don't want to bother your grant officer, which you certainly should always feel comfortable reaching out to them. But if you just have something quick that you want to pop into the AAQ, you're welcome to do that, and an expert will answer your question.
And Jennifer, during your last few slides, we have had a question or two related to environmental reviews, and you've called attention to item 4, that is the contacts for the regional environmental officer. We would urge you to direct any specific questions about environmental review, as Tracy and Giddy have, to your grant officer and the environmental officer for your region, who can look at the specific details associated with your project and give you the correct answer. We have one final question, and I'll maybe direct this to Connor. Once the forms are all received by the grant officer, what is the timeline for final approval?
Yeah, so, and I think Giddy also posted this in the chat, but
She did.
we're not giving timelines for approval of grant packages, simply because every grant package is different. Some grants might need extra time to be analyzed for approval or denial, in which they would get sent back for corrections. And our grant officers also have pretty high workloads and are working through all of the package submissions as quickly as they can. What you can do is, of course, continue to reach out to your grant officer and request updates. And your grant officer should be able to get back to you and give you a status of your grant package once you've submitted. We do recommend also, if you're having trouble getting in contact with your grant officer, one option that you have is to go to the CPF AAQ, which is on HUD-X, which of course Randall said you can use to submit any programmatic questions you have about the CPF program. You can also use it to indicate that you need to get in touch with your grant officer. Just indicate your grant number, your organization, what who your grant officer is, and those questions in the AAQ will get routed back to our office, and we'll work to get your grant officer to contact you directly if you're requesting to get in contact with them.
And Jennifer, the last question concerns the availability of these slides, and I want to point out that I believe those who registered were sent an advance copy of the slides. They are also going to be posted to the HUD Exchange after they go through a Section 508 compliance, which assures that all can access those slides, and they will again be posted to the CPF landing page, and particularly identified as the FY23 cohort materials. And we would urge you again to subscribe to the listserv in regard to the EDI-CPF Community Project Funding Grants Program so that you can be notified when those slide decks become available. It should be a period of a week or so, and you will be able to, as Connor is suggesting here, be able to actually just click on these links and immediately then go to the AAQ and ask a question or make contact with your grant officer.
Great, thank you. So, excuse me, with that, we asked just one final thing today, and that's that you complete the evaluation. We do an evaluation for each session so that we can learn more about how you feel things went. This evaluation link will be emailed to you from cohorts@tdainc.org, but if you complete it now, you won't have to worry about responding to that. So you can pop out your phone, scan that QR code, and then you'll have it up and easily at your fingertips to complete. It only takes a few moments, but it helps us a great deal. So if you could take the time to do that, we would greatly appreciate it.
And we would urge you to participate in the office hours session that Jennifer identified and take advantage of that session to answer your specific questions. You'll even have the chance to be unmuted and orally ask your question and even discuss it at some length. Time permitting, we'll even invite you to share a project description or a budget in respect to the details and the specific activities that are funded with your CPF grant. Questions about your SF 424 and other submission items that are covered in the in regard to the forms and submission of your grant application packet. So on behalf of TDA Consulting and the Department of HUD, we thank you for your active participation and look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you all.